Hello, this video will be about functions in C++. This will be an introduction to functions in C++. To start off, let's just talk about what functions are. You can think of functions as analogous to mathematical functions, in which you have some kind of formula to which you plug in some numbers and then you get some results. So for functions we have an input, that is, you give in some sort of data, some kind of data, and then the function is going to do some operation on that data. It's going to process it and then it's going to give you back some results, which we call the output. So function has inputs and then it does some operation on those inputs and then produces an output. And oftentimes you will be using functions to reuse code. That is, if you find yourself typing the same code over and over again, then it's very likely that you should make that code into a function and then call that function from then on. So basically, you have some kind of code that you often find yourself writing. Then what if you just wrote that code once and then you had the ability to just call that whole thing a function, you give it a name, and then every time you need to perform that kind of operation, you just call the function name, and then it goes and performs all those instructions that you have laid out previously. So one of the most important things that you have to know is that functions allow you to reuse code. Also, because of that, it allows for modularity. That is, you can write many functions which themselves can call other functions, and then you have some kind of a modular system. You can add modules, add new functions, remove new functions as you please without compromising the whole system. That said, that's just an introduction, an overview. Let's get to code. So suppose I have here a C++ program, my main function. There's not really anything right now. If I compile it, intro functions, I'm going to give it a name, functions, as the output file. Executed, nothing really. So to start off, let's write our first function. So since this is an introduction, you will be writing all your functions before the main function. Otherwise, the main function will not know the definition of the functions. So the syntax says first you have to say the return value of the function. That is, what kind of output. Let's say we want to create a function to add up two numbers, two integer numbers. So C++, what is the return type? Where we're adding two integers. The result has to be an integer in our case here, so we call the return value int. Give the function a name. I'm going to call it add. Could be any name you want. Now we have to have some parameters, and those are the two input numbers. So for the parameters list, which also can be called arguments, though technically they're not the same, but it's okay to say it. So you have to, what are the inputs here? So you have two numbers. You have to say here in the parentheses, let's call it x and y, and you have to say their types. So two integers, so int x, int y, and then you have a function block between the braces. So this is the operation we're going to do for this function called add, which takes as input an integer called x and an integer called y, and returns some int in the end of the operation. So let's create a variable called sum that's going to hold an integer, and then to that sum integer variable we're going to assign the what we get from adding x and y, and then we're going to return the sum. So we are taking our input x or input y adding it up and then returning as the output to the function, because this function returns an int, and sum is itself an int because x is an int and y is an int. So let's try it out right here. So in my main function, what I'm going to do is I am going to declare some integer variable to hold my sum, and then I'm going to call my function. So my sum, let's say I want to add the values 27 and 11. So the way I would call the function from the main function here is I give what is the name of the function I am calling, what are the arguments that I'm passing to the function called add. I'm passing the integer 27, the integer 11. So 27 gets mapped to the first parameter of at the add function, which is called x here, and 11 is mapped to the second parameter, which is called y, in the add parameter list in parentheses here. So what this is going to do is you're going to call add, you're passing these parameters, these arguments which get mapped to each parameter. So x becomes 27 and y becomes 11. And then once we're here in the add function, we're going to create a sum local variable, and to that we're going to assign the sum of the two arguments that were passed into the function, which are 27 and 11. So 27 plus 11 becomes 38. So sum has the value 38, which is returned from this function. So when it returns, whatever you had here in your function call is gonna become whatever was returned to the function. In this case, it would become 38 ultimately. So that's what would be assigned to the variable mySum. So let's see what we get. If that is indeed the case, I'll do a cout to print the value of that the variable mySum is holds. Okay. Now let's test it out, compile the code. Oh, I forgot using namespace standard. If I don't want to type std cout all the time, I have to have this. So let me add that. Clear here, compile, execute. So we got 38 as the output, as expected. So let's walk through this one more time. I have a integer variable, mySum, to which I assign a value that is the return value of the function called add. So I call add and I pass in 27 and 11. So the parameters in add are x and y, those are the inputs, and they get mapped to 27 and 11. And then here inside add, I just add those two inputs, 27 plus 11, and I get 38, and then I return that. And then 38 gets returned here and is assigned to mySum, and I display it with cout. End line just means break a line, if you don't know. Okay. Now let's do something else. Let's just practice a little more. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create two integer variables to hold an integer. My a number holds 10, another number holds 22. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to call add function. Instead of passing those 27 and 11, I'm going to pass my variables, integer variables. Okay, so you notice that parameters here are all integers, so I'm passing ints. So make sure you're passing the right kind of argument to the function. Your type has to match here. Later we're going to see what happens if we try to pass a float when the function itself only takes an int. So let's see what we get here. So we assign 10 to a number, 22 to another number. So we call add and we pass those variables. What's going to happen is pretty much the same thing that happened before. Okay, a number is actually 10, gets mapped to x. Another number is 22, gets mapped to y. So it's going to return 10 plus 22, which is 32. So we're going to get 32 inside the variable mySum, which is going to be displayed. So 32, right? Let's save it and test it out. Recompile, execute, 32 indeed. Okay, now let's have some more practice. I want you to write a function to subtract two integer numbers. So let's go at it together. So what's the first thing you have to write for your function? It's the return value. What's the output of the function? Well, we want it to be an integer, so just call it int. What are we going to call that function? Subtract. Make it easy. What are the inputs? What are the parameters here? We have two integer numbers, so we can just call it x and y, we did before, but let's change it. Let's call it mb, so that you can see you can give it any name you want. Okay, and pretty much is the same thing we did here, except it's a minus sign here, operator, right? And we don't call it sum, it's called subtraction. But you know, this can be made into one line. Instead of create a variable, assign it to a variable, then return that variable, you can just say return a plus b. Much more clear and tidier. Yeah, and you didn't even declare any variable. So, okay. Oh, then I meant to be minus. Sorry. Return a minus b, and this could be just return a plus b. Sorry, y, x plus y. But I'm leaving it as before, that you can see, you can compare. So that's pretty much it. You get a value, input a and b, and you subtract them, and you return the evaluated expression, the subtraction. Okay, let's do some tests. And what I want to do now is right after my sum, I'm going to create my subtraction variable to hold the subtraction, and then I'm going to call my brand new function that we created called subtract. And what are the arguments to that function? Let's say we want to subtract 32 and subtract 8 from 32, so 32 and 8. Don't forget semicolon. Then display the value, see out my subtraction. We expect it to be 32 minus 8, 24, right? Compile, execute. I forgot to put a new line, so end L to break the line right here. Let's compile it again, execute. So first we had 32 from the other operation, then we want to look at this 24 from my subtraction. 32 minus 8, 24. So indeed it worked as expected. So what if we swap these? 8 and 32, what do we expect? So 8 gets mapped to A, 32 gets mapped to B. So A is 8, B is 32, 8 minus 32. We're going to get a negative number, right? So what would we get? Let's try it out. So we got negative 24. As expected, we got a negative number. So you gotta also watch out the order of your parameters here and the order of the arguments you give. You have to match it to get the desired behavior. So if you didn't expect to get a negative number out of this, then you should probably swap these back to get the desired positive number. Okay. Now, what if we pass a float to our functions, what's gonna happen? Because all of the function parameters are integers, and we're returning integers. What if I try to pass on a different kind of argument, different data type, a float, which has a decimal part? We can try it out. Let's just comment this, and first work with add. So I'm gonna replace these with something else. Please ignore these for now. What I'm gonna do add 23.2 and 3. So 3 is an integer, that's okay, but 23.2 is a float or a double. So we're gonna get a double or float mapped into x, which is an integer. So what would we get? I mean, mathematically speaking, if you add these two, you would get 26.2. But what would you get? What will the computer do here? What will C++ do? I compile, no problems, it seems. Compile didn't complain about that. Make sure I'm displaying my variable. I got 26 as the result. So what happened here? 23.2 gets mapped to an integer that has x. And then you try to add 3, it's supposed to be 26.2. We got 26 only. It seems the decimal part has been discarded. That is indeed the case, because the thing here, the float got truncated when it tried to implicitly convert or was being cast to an integer. So you pass 23.2 to x, but x is an integer, so it cannot take a decimal, so it's going to drop that decimal part and just get 23. Assign 23 to x and 3 to y. So there's an implicit conversion there. So you're going to get 23 plus 3, 26, what we got. Let's try other examples. Let's put 3.7. So we expect mathematically 26.9, right? What we get? 26. See, if we made a reasonable guess, we'd think, well, why doesn't it round? 23.2 plus 3.7, 26.9. It's almost 4. It's almost it's almost 26.9, almost 27. So why didn't it round? The same thing happened here. Both of these are floats, but as they get mapped into the parameters in the add function, since they're both integers, both of these will be truncated, meaning the decimal part will be discarded so that they can become pure integer values. And they get added up, 23 plus 3, 26. There's no rounding, it's just truncation. Just get rid of the decimal no matter what values they are. So why don't we try this? Maybe this will work, no? 23.2 plus 3.8. Well, that should be 2427.0. No? Oh my gosh. We got 26 still. Even though we thought it would be 27. Again, the same thing happened. As they get mapped into the parameters which are both integers, they get truncated, no matter the value of the decimal part is. So 23.2 just becomes 23, 3.8 just becomes 3. Add them up, 26. There's no way it's going to be 27, even though the decimal parts add up so that it's going to become 27. But it got truncated right as the arguments get mapped to the parameters in the function here. Alright, try just another last example. Mathematically it would be 3.8, but we're dealing with integers, so we expect 1 plus 2, right? Because the decimal part gets truncated, discarded. So 1 plus 2, 3. 3. Right there. Alright? Hope you got to understand that. Well, so next we're going to talk about passing arguments by value, passing by reference.